Testing to see if sound is coming through. Somebody inside Jabber just type if you're hearing this.
You can hear you, Robert. Yeah. Okay. Just waiting for Amelia to come on. While we are waiting, is there anybody willing to take minutes for this meeting? David, can I twist your arm to do it? Yes, can I see? Okay, I still don't see Amelia, so I think we should get started off. Can you hear me? Can somebody type in the chat if they can hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Perfect, thank you. Charles, can I ask you or Jonathan to like put in something in the minutes? I'll cover you when you're presenting. Just like high level, like would be enough. Like just take care of the decisions if there's any. Thanks, Charles. Can you see my screen?
Yes, we can see the screen.
Thank you. So just like, starting off with the note well, I'm sure like you've seen it all, and just to like, make sure that like, if you have any questions, like, please read the relevant RFCs. They have more details than what's in here. And like it requires like more time than I can show the slide for. And just going through, thanks Charles, like for taking the minutes. I'll be watching the Jabber as well. And we'll just go through the deliverables very quickly and go on to the presentations for the working group drafts and the hackathon draft, which is not at the working group item. So we have like 4 classes of deliverables, and the idea is like, kind of we are trying to start adopting drafts as soon as possible when there was a candidate for it. And the first 2 guidelines, so first of them for the cancellation considerations, we do have a working group item. This is like Martin's draft. It was adopted as working group item between the last 2 meetings, from the last meeting to now. and there's like some comments that came in, like not like extremely actionable. So there is concerns, but some of them were not very, I would say, it's not clear like what changes need to be made to the draft. So, but Jay's comments also came in a couple of days ago. So Martin has kind of put together some kind of responses for that, and we can have a discussion today as to how to proceed incorporating those comments. And there's also a draft for the meeting fees for fully online meetings. So this is the remote fee draft. So like John is going to present today along with Miriam and Rich along with him. And this one has like, kind of a lot of comments already integrated into the draft. And so I think like this should be ready for working group last call pretty quickly. And as the meeting planning itself, this has been kind of like lagging a little bit behind. So last time we had like 2 drafts. One of them is like Mallory's draft, another one is Michael's draft. They both were presented last time, and they haven't received any updates in there. But like Charles has updated his draft for the hackathon for a fully virtual IETF, and Charles will present today. And the technology front, really, there's not much in there. I was expecting like, quite a few drafts will show up here, but this has been surprisingly very little activity there. So other than the show of hands draft, we haven't seen much progress in this. So the idea is like to continue working on the 2 drafts where we have the candidates, and try to adopt the hackathon draft soon, and continue to reevaluate like, what are the things that we need as a community going forward. So any questions on it? Okay, don't see anybody at the mic. Okay, so going on, like, so we have 3 presentations today. Oh, is there somebody at the mic? Yeah, please go ahead.
Yeah, hi, Suraj. I was in the queue. I'm not sure what happened there, but yeah, just a question about the show of hands tool. So at one point we discussed the idea of adopting that came up, and I don't remember the exact context, but we decided not to adopt it, but I wasn't aware there was a deliverable in this area. So is my recollection of this incorrect?
Yeah, there is like a technology deliverable in the system, right? So there could be multiple drafts that combine together to satisfy the deliverable, but we are still like kind of like deciding what are the set of tools, right? And the feedback for this was, let's say like a lot of people are positive, but there's also like a lot of people who are negative, and some people are like ambivalent on this. So the idea is to figure out like, kind of what are the set of tools that we need. So once we get the first 2 drafts on the way, we can continue to discuss this and do the technology pieces, right? Like, and that's kind of the high level thinking I have, and we can certainly discuss that further, right? Like, but yeah, like I do think it's useful. Like, I'm not sure like, how the results have to be presented, right? Like, the piano kind of stuff is like kind of like, weird for a little few people, right? But that's something we can figure out, like, how we use some tool like this to kind of judge the the voice of the audience kind of thing. So yeah, that's kind of my thinking on this.
The piano's gone because we're now with show of hands, but regardless, yeah, I'm not in any rush, but just wanted to clarify. Thanks.
Perfect. Thank you. Thanks. Thank you. So John, if you can come up, like I'll just put up your slides.
Yep. Can you all hear me?
Yeah, thank you.
John Reed, Akamai, here again to talk about this draft with Miria and Rich. Rich is co-chairing Acme, so he's not here right now. Basically, where we are is, we think we're quite close, if not ready for working group last call. I think some other people mentioned that on the list. And there's sort of 2 pull requests that concern the same issue. That I feel like once we resolve those, we're probably in a good position. And that issue is around other events beyond meetings and working group sessions. And there were sort of 2 proposals. One was simply to add a parenthetical that meetings include other related events. The other was to be a bit more detailed about explicitly calling out the other events and some examples of them, such as the hackathon, for which obviously a fee is not charged right now, but if one were to be charged in the future, to indicate that this draft should apply to that as well. So we really just wanted to get the working group's opinion as to whether we are close to last call, and if folks have any opinions on either of the two methods to add some clarity around related events. So really short, 3 slides. I definitely won't need the whole 15 minutes unless there's very complicated questions.
So if you have any questions on this, can you please come up to the mic?
Yeah, Mary, did you want to add anything?
Yeah, I just want to say that you can also just go on GitHub and have a look what the proposals are. But it's really this general question if we want to restrict the draft on meeting fees to the main meeting venue only, or if we want to be a little bit broader here, and if we want to be a little bit broader, what's the broader? So I hope we if we want to be broader, I hope we can converge soon and move forward quickly, or maybe if we can't converge soon, then we might just be very focused and move on.
Makes sense, Maria, to just be focused and move on, right? So Bob, go ahead.
Yes, I mean, I'd be careful with the wording about free, because right now we're very fortunate that we have very good support from ISOC and so forth. But if money should ever get tight, then maintaining free might not be possible. So certainly, I think it's a reasonable goal, but I'm not sure I'd want to make it completely authoritative.
Can I reply to that?
Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, I think that's an entirely different point. So this draft on purpose just sets up a principle about having free options and does not talk about financing, because that's a question for the LAC. If there's actually a problem in the future, they need to come back to the community. We have to talk about it, but this would actually change the base principle of the draft entirely.
Okay, but it does seem to be ignoring the underlying reality that it's not free, that everything we do has costs.
Yes, but it's a different question how these costs are financed, if you have to have a meeting for free for it, or there are other ways to finance it, right? And that's not a question for this draft. That's a question for the LSE.
Yep. Thanks, Bob. I think that's a really good point, right? And when the group was chartered, that was ruled out of scope, right? The financial model itself, and that's probably something we can explore afterwards, right? Once we get this out, and maybe at some future point, if we do think it's not going to work, we had to figure out what is the venue. But right now, we are not chartered to look at the financial model itself, Bob.
Well, I wasn't suggesting we look at the financial model. I'm just pick words that make this a goal, not a strict requirement.
Okay. Can you probably suggest some text, Bob, where you want some changes in this, if that would be good, and then we can have the discussion, right? There's this is generally just laying down a principle, right? That we want to follow, and if we think this too prescriptive, we can have the discussion on where the things can be changed there, right?
Sure.
And the draft does call out that obviously there is not a zero cost associated with that. There's a whole section on that. So
yeah,
I see Charles was in the.
Yeah, Charles and Lars are in the queue. Yeah, thanks.
Hey, yeah, hi. So I just wanted to comment on the two proposals for the proposals for the related events, and so obviously this is one of the things I brought up. I think it's important to cover the related events. I thought the just kind of relatively simple proposal where we just added in that this applied not only to the IETF meeting, but also to related events, that was, at least that kind of simple approach was acceptable to me. It seemed like it could work. It's kind of a tough balance between putting a lot where you think it's really, really very descriptive and there's no ambiguity in it, and then leaving a little bit of ambiguity so that the draft is more kind of future-proof. And putting the related events, to me, was an okay way to do it. I think alternatively, we could spell out some of the events that we know about, but then as soon as there's something new that we all agree would be a related event, but it's not explicitly mentioned, then I could see where we might have some problems. So, but also it sounded as if I hadn't seen any more ongoing discussion after what was in the mailing list. Is the discussion continuing in GitHub, or because I could take a look there. I hadn't seen that if there was something happening.
Yeah.
I don't think there's much discussion. The reason, so I'd be okay with a small change. I'm just like mentioning it because like putting related events in the scope was something we really didn't consider at the beginning. So it does change the scope of the draft quite a bit, even if it's just like 2 words. So I want to make sure that like the working group is okay with this actually quite big change. And then, you know, I got start thinking about this when I thought about social events, right? We don't have remote options for social events, but like, do we need to offer in future a remote option for social event? And has this to have a free option as well, right? My answer to that would be rather no. While if you talk about the hackathon, I really, really think this should be free, and we should make it possible for as many people as possible to participate, also to increase, you know, diversity and outreach and whatever. But like at that point, it wasn't a super easy decision for me anymore. And like, I'm okay to take the 2 words in, to leave it vague, and to have a discussion at another point of time when it comes up. But it would also be okay to just like focus on meeting fees and go ahead with that.
Yeah, I mean, actually, you reminded me of one of the things was pointing to the other RFC. I forget which one it is that defined some concept of IETF work or something like that. And I think that helped, because at least for me, that differentiated between those things that really have to do with the work of the IETF meeting, as opposed to, you know, auxiliary events that are more for fun, like the social. So, you know, with those 2 things in there, that worked for me. But that, you know, anyways, just giving my 2 cents.
Can you point this RC out again, and then maybe we can just add like a half sentence and we're done, rather than a whole paragraph?
Okay, yeah, I'll have to look it up. I don't remember it, but it came up in the email thread. But I'll circle back on that and post something to the list.
Thanks.
Thanks, Charles. Thank you. Lars, please go ahead.
Hey, so I sympathize with Bob's point a little bit in the sense that this draft at the moment leaves it sort of completely open and says it doesn't talk about financials. I wonder if sort of a middle ground proposal would be to add something to the draft that says that, you know, there might be a limit to the number of free passes that are given out if financials become a constraint or something like that. So you at least sort of allow that as a possibility, given that this will be a BCP. Because at the moment, you can read this and basically say unlimited free passes forever, right? Which is, I'm not sure if that's the extreme we want to, you know, establish. Certainly, we want to do it when we have money for it. But if we at some point don't, it would be nice to have a little caveat in there that allows the LLC board to do things differently.
So a couple of points. So first of all, we didn't put a limit on there because that was when this remote meeting fee came up on the IETF list, was like one of the big concerns, that it was limited to 100 people only, and nobody understood where this come from, and that shouldn't be the limit. It should not depend on how much money we have to do it. It should really depend on if somebody needs to have the free waiver in order to participate or not, right? People who have been participated remotely without a fee should be able to do that. They should be able to just continue their work. And binding the viability of the IETF to meeting fees, it's a completely different discussion. Because when you say we cannot provide free waivers anymore because we don't have enough money, maybe you didn't do enough sponsoring, maybe you didn't care fully about the money, because like meeting fees is not the only way of income, right? So this is like going into a lot of corner cases, and that's what we don't want to discuss in the draft. And I had a third one, but I don't know. I don't remember.
By not discussing it, you're not making the problem go away.
So
yes, but it's not our problem. It's the LLC's problem.
It's a simplistic way of thinking of it, Maria, right? But yeah.
This is just giving guiding principles to the LLC. What they do with it is a different question. And that's my third point. So we do discuss a little bit about misuse in the draft, because there should always be enough money for people who actually need the fee, the waiver, to have. That shouldn't be a concern, because it shouldn't be like a huge amount of money. The larger amount of participants should actually pay, because that's how the IETF works. There are companies who have money, who want to participate, who get something out of it, right? If that principle doesn't work anymore, we have a different problem. So the only thing we need to make sure is that this is not misused. But that's also something that we say we should care about it if it actually happens.
So your principle says must. There must always be an option for free remote participation. If your principle said should, I would be completely fine.
So there must always be an option for free participation, but how you decide who gets the free participation might be a different question. How you decide if something is misuse or an actually valid use is a different question. Yeah,
and like we said, we do have those two sections in there. So I've heard some folks say that we should talk about it. We do talk about it. So having some more concrete suggestions of ways to address this that is not already addressed by the text would be helpful if folks have feedback on that.
I think I'll send some text, John and Maria, right? Like I do have some thoughts on this, so I will send some sample text. I understand where Bob and Lars are coming from. I'll see if I can come up with some text which kind of doesn't say, hey, LLC figure it out, to saying, hey, like we do fixed numbers. So I don't like the fixed number thing either. So I think I'll think of some text.
Yeah, that's also my point. Like I understand where the concerns are coming from. I'm just like don't think like restricting the number of free waivers is the right thing to do here.
Okay, thank you. Martin, you're up next.
Yeah, I just want to say that I think conceptually the idea that there's like a fixed number of free waivers that we can afford is just not correct. Like the marginal cost of a remote attendee is essentially zero. So like free waivers are only a problem to the extent that they cannibalize people who'd otherwise pay. And I'm not sure how I feel about some of the language about like criteria for that. I mean, we've gotten away with just like sort of just saying it's an honor system. That may become untenable at some point, but we're certainly not there today. And I wouldn't mind language that made it clear that we could tighten those restrictions if they're proved to be a problem. But having a free option, I don't think there's any limit on how many waivers we can grant.
Yeah, that's a good point. I think like as long as you have enough people paying, like adding a huge number of free waivers on top of that is not a financial problem.
Yep, thank you. I don't see anybody else in the queue unless like Charles, Lars, or Martin, you want to make another comment? Okay, thank you. So Miria, and John, I'll send you the text, I promise, within a week or so, and let's try to get the draft to work to last call and see how things go from there. Thank you.
Great. Thanks.
Thanks. Martin, you're up next. I'll start sharing.
Yes. All right. So we had a successful adoption call a while back, and thanks for everyone's comments. This is my very short summary of the email feedback. I would say that at the time these messages were sent, I would agree with all of these sentiments. But as Suresh hinted, I don't think there's any actionable stuff here. I invite people to continue to read the document and comment. Next slide. But I did ask Jay to, next slide, please. I did ask Jay, as the LLC is essentially the implementer of this draft, and actually I think this applies to some of the other drafts too. Like some feedback from the LLC would be good because they will be implementing this. I did ask him to do a thorough review of it, and he provided one a couple days ago. So I've not had a ton of time to digest this, but I would summarize this is the main points. He introduced this concept of emergency versus non-emergency, in which like there's time for consultation versus the LLC just has to kind of execute. And I think it's a useful concept, and I'm planning to put it in the next version of the draft. Another thing he called out that I think needs some more discussion regards to the roles of the LLC and the IESG. In the current version of the draft, the LLC is purely addressing the ability of the venue to support the meeting, and that it is safe to have people attend. And the IESG is fully responsible for saying, with this number of people and this constellation of bands and so on, we're able to carry on the work of the meeting effectively in person. And this is, I think, kind of how it worked in 107, which is when we really had to deal with this. The IESG went out to the working groups and kind of polled them and said, like, you know, do you have enough people? And obviously the situation changed very quickly, and we had to cancel regardless of the answer. But for a while, we're looking at, do we have enough people? We asked the working group chairs if it was viable for them to continue with the current situation regarding corporate travel bans and so on. And like the advantage of that approach is that, you know, it gets the LLC out of the business of saying, well, you know, this nation has a travel ban to the host nation, but like it's not that important to the standards process. We can continue, and like this company is you know, this company is important and has a travel ban or a boycott or whatever, and just kind of gets out of those sorts of fine-grained decisions. Jay pointed out that RFC, oh gosh, I lost the number now. I think it's like 8713 or something, has a meeting criterion in its normal venue vetting process that the vast majority of attendees can attend. So I think the number we've been using for vast majority is 80%. And so I would, I think it is not. So let's see. Okay, I'm going to assume that you can hear me again. So like, I think it is probably fine to have something like an 80% threshold for the LLC to evaluate based on historic attendance, and still give the ISG the role to do more fine-grained control. Like, I mean, for instance, in San Francisco, I think it's entirely possible coming up here on 111 that U.S. domestic travel will be completely fine, but international travel will be pretty broken. And that implies that we would have something like 50% of the population that could attend, and that would meet the LLC's criteria, but the IASG would still be well within its right to say, no, that's not satisfactory, and stop it there. Jay also had some other rewordings that I'm just going to implement. I think they're uncontroversial. I can take Charles out of the queue now to talk about this before I go to the next slide.
Charles, go ahead.
Sorry, I think I never exited the queue. I just did now. So I was there accidentally.
Okay. All right, no worries. Moving along. Okay, and then Jordy, I guess spurred by Jay's review, had some additional comments. So another issue that I kind of anticipated would be a little controversial was that the safety was assessed via travel advisories, and for various reasons, the U.S. Department of State is a fairly long-standing, well-respected source of travel advisories. It's in English, which is useful since the LLC staff is guaranteed to speak English. However, the U.S. DOS does not provide advisories to travel to the United States, and so I needed another source. I thought the EU might be a good source, but they don't do that at the EU level, and so the UK Foreign Office happens to be English speaking and not in the US, so I picked that one. I'm completely happy to suggest an alternate source there. Jordy isn't really happy with that and would like some other formulation. I think the one he proposed is not really viable, but I'm open to some other one there. And then his other comment was on reimbursement. So the current reimbursement text is that the IETF, there's some caveats in there and some exceptions, but basically that if the IETF cancels the meeting, it should refund your meeting fees, but not your travel costs. And there's an escape clause, like let's not become insolvent because of this. Let's not go bankrupt in an effort to refund people. He wanted the IETF to refund travel fees. That seemed problematic to me because IETF doesn't have that money in the first place, like the airlines and hotels do. But I guess I can see the reasoning behind his argument. So I'm happy to take. That's the end of my presentation. I'm happy to take thoughts and comments about any of these items. Thanks.
Thank you. Thanks, Martin. Miria, go ahead.
Yeah, I agree with Miria. Right. There's travel insurances that can be obtained if one wants to use them, or if your employer pays for them, they have that. And the IETF can simply not do this.
Thanks, Lars. Jody, go ahead.
Yeah. My point about refunding is that if there is a decision, a grown decision of canceling a meeting, that should have some liability on the IETF. I mean, if there is a global emergency or a local emergency or whatever, I think that's fine. But what happens if the IETF, the LLC, take a wrong decision? That was my point. Maybe I didn't make it clear. So I am not talking in general, but we need to put a limit, a borderline about what can be a good decision to cancel a meeting and what not, especially because if we cancel a meeting because, for example, half of the participants decide not to attend and nothing is happening, I mean, nothing that avoids the meeting coming on, of course the IETF is saving some money. So some of this money being saved can be used to pay back the participants that they are not able to get the refunding from the airline. Okay, that was my point about the funding. The other point about the US advisory and the UK advisory is, first, they are wrong. I recall that was about 4 years ago. The UK advisory was still saying that Spain is a terrorist country and we cannot have meetings there and it's suggested not to travel there. It's ridiculous. That's the first thing. So that shows that they are clearly political bias. The second thing is that it's unethical and it's discriminatory for any IETF document to cite any specific country. I suggested a wording that I think in my work. Why we don't need to mention specific countries if the insurance companies are already mentioning the advisories from US, then you don't need to put that in an RFC because it's already in the contracts from the insurance, right? So making the document transparent, clear, and very neutral don't means that the LLC still need to take in consideration the insurance policies. I think that's normal. Thank you.
Okay, Jordy, I think there's a lot of, let me take the opportunity to respond to a few of those items. So number one, on the IETF saving money when there's cancellation, I don't know that's necessarily the case. There's certainly cases in a last minute cancellation where we would not recover the funds. And and so actually cancellation can often cause a loss of money because because of course the venue fees are being covered by the dues, which we are refunding, And so if we can't recover the venue costs and refund the fees, then we're actually taking a big loss on that cancellation. So I don't think it's a generally applicable statement that the IETF is saving money there. In terms of the language that you proposed, I mean, I think what you actually wrote was something of the nature of like, if any local, regional, or national authority says that it's unsafe to travel there, that would be grounds to cancel, and that seemed really expansive. Maybe it's not what you meant. So I invite some additional language there. The other thing about the contracts is, so for a little background for people. So one thing I pointed out that in 2020, our insurance contracts would reimburse us for cancellation if there was a U.S. travel advisory to a certain place. So that obviously has a big bearing on the fiscal result of cancellation. And that's one reason we put it. The fact that it's in the contract gives us good reason to believe that the financial cover will be better if we cancel with that advisory. So again, I'm open to other language here. I really would like it to have it be fairly prescriptive rather than making the LLC just sort of pick like some authorities based on things. And like if you have specific issues with UKFO, I'm happy to suggest a different second alternative, preferably English speaking, because there's often nuance in these things. And again, the LLC staff speaks English, at least. So, I'd be happy to go to Australia, New Zealand, or even maybe India, or some other Anglophone country, or some other country that publishes stuff in English. But, beyond that, I'm not sure what to say. So I'll open up to the queue now.
Yeah, thanks, Martin. And Jody, yeah, thanks for the comment, right? Like, so like a couple of things I wanted to mention. Like one of the things is like, it's not clear that the contracts like are not confidential, right? So some of the times, like, and I think like probably Jason is on the meeting, right? Like if he wants to like chime in, right? But a lot of the times the contracts might be confidential. So it's kind of hard for us to verify as a community what's in there, right? So I think putting in some kind of sources in there is interesting. And the second thing is kind of, we need to look at where the participants come from, right? Like, so maybe like there needs to be some kind of weighting for that as well, right? Like, and I think like Martin, I don't know, it was you who said, right? Like, hey, if there was a EU-wide like advisory somewhere, we could take that, right? And I think that could be a fair play. So if you can help us, Jody, right? Like I know you do a lot of these things in the looking at like a lot of the advisories and everything from the EU. So if you can point us to some source there to add in as like a third source, I think that will be good. So like, and I fully agree, it shouldn't be discriminatory, but like the only way to handle it is like probably add more sources that you feel will balance out the thing rather than taking out one more thing and just letting the US stand there, right? I think that probably is the best way forward. Thanks. So suggest text, Jody. Thank you.
There's no one else in the queue, I believe. So just to conclude, so I will make the non-controversial, what I view uncontroversial changes that Jay suggested. I will play with the formulation of some of these things. I haven't heard anything about the ISG LLC split issue that Jay raised that I mentioned. I'm inclined to probably go with the compromise that I suggested, which is that there's this very high 80% threshold, and that the ISG has some discretion below that number to cancel the meeting anyway, unless somebody speaks up about it. So I would expect to see those changes in the draft. I'm searching for a new. So I'm hearing a lot of pushback on this refund travel cost idea, both the mic and in the Jabber. I'm open to a formulation on this travel advisory thing, but I don't think I've seen it yet in the thread. So I don't know what changes I'm going to make at this time, unless I see something that I think works. Okay. Thank you.
Thanks, Martin. Thank you. I don't see anybody else in the queue. I'll give you a couple of minutes if somebody wants to get in the queue while I line up Charles's presentation. Charles, if you can come up.
Yep. Okay, great. Yeah, thanks. So, so this draft I presented at IETF 109 as well, running an IETF hackathon. It's not specifically just for running the hackathon from the perspective of online only meetings. It's really about running the hackathon overall, but has some discussion in there about aspects of it which are pertinent to online meetings, to remote participation, and to online only meetings as well. So the changes, this version that's posted now, 02, the current version, basically all the feedback from IETF 109 and the things we learned from that hackathon. We made some enhancements in preparation for the one for IETF 110, which we just had last week. And so there's some information about those that I added. And then the other thing was, in going through this process, realizing that although online only is a big focus of this working group, and that was the way I stated it in the draft, that really a lot of what we were adding in there for online only is just important for remote participation in general. So changing the way it's described a bit to indicate that. And then the current draft was also shared with it was discussed during the hackathon itself last week, and shared on that list. So expecting some good comments to come back from those who were participating in these online hackathons. Next slide, please. The one big change I wanted to point out, and this really came about as a result of comments from several people, I think, at the last IETF meeting at 109, and that was broadening the scope. And the example I have here is taken from the abstract. And I think this more accurately reflects the current spirit of the hackathon that we want. Initially, it was focused as being just for, or at least worded as being only for developers. Of course, we know we've moved from that. We want to be able to attract developers as kind of a missing entity or an underrepresented entity in the IETF, but it's really for the whole IETF community. And what we see is it's very valuable to people who aren't developers, subject matter experts of all sorts. And so captured that. The other thing was, it was initially stated as showing examples, focusing on showing examples of practical implementations of IETF standards. And we know that people use it for much more than that. It really has to do with a running code related to any existing or evolving or proposed IETF standards. So made those two changes in the abstract, but you'll see that reflected throughout. Next slide. This was thanks to Benson. We added an HTML template for project presentations. A key part of the hackathon is the presentations that we do at the end, where people show, hey, this is what we actually accomplished, and really focusing on the information that's going to come back to the IETF working group to move the IETF standards that are involved forward. So we had a PowerPoint template, which people were welcome to use, and many did. And as Benson pointed out, it'd be really nice to have an HTML template. It actually plays nicer with GitHub and some of the change tracking tools, and it's just much lighter weight and a very lightweight format for people to use. So we added that. There are some technical problems with it currently, and Benson pointed that out to me. So I'm going to try to fix that and probably get Benson's help to do that as well. And then I'll update the draft accordingly. Next slide, please. At the previous meeting, we talked about sponsor benefits, and this is not really needed necessarily for actually running the hackathon, but we're talking about having free options for things, and the hackathon currently is free for everyone, and so obviously there's costs. And so the feeling was it was important to say what sponsors actually get out of it. And so there was some information added in the draft, and now the sponsorship that the IETF has been kind of revamped a bit, where there's a running code sponsor. I haven't added that to the draft, but there's a GitHub issue to track that. So that'll get added in the next version. Next slide. Yeah, so creating an email alias, going through this documentation process, I realized, hey, there are several places where the chairs are emailed directly as the contacts, using their personal or work email address. And it's obviously better to have an alias for that. So we just did the same thing we do for working groups, basically asked the Secretariat to create an alias, and now we're using that everywhere. And so that's been updated in the draft as well. Next slide. And as I mentioned, the online only, there were several places where we removed this and changed it to focus more on, these are aspects that help support remote participation in general. And the examples here highlighted are WebEx accounts for hackathon project leads that they can use, for their team. It's really helpful for meeting with remote participants, even if you're at an in-person meeting. The use of Gather. The expectation is that that'll actually stick around after we start meeting in person again. And then, so switching the expenses that were identified as being for online only meetings to really being aspects that are needed for remote participation. That was done as well. Okay, so next steps, fix the HTML template stuff. I mentioned we're using GitHub for tracking issues, so address those, and then incorporate feedback based on what we learned from this IETF hackathon, and hopefully some good discussion that's going to happen here and on the mailing list. Next slide. So specific questions for the working group. So we just had a discussion here about fees, and what the hackathon draft says is that the hackathon is free, but we're not assuming, although I'd love for it to always stay free for everyone. In the event it didn't, the thought was, hey, we need to cover, or thought it was important to cover remote participation in the hackathon. So in case you weren't following that discussion before and wondering where that came from, that was kind of what I had in mind when I brought it up. And I think we have a workable solution. I just forwarded an email to the list to kind of kick that discussion back up and hopefully wrap it up. But then, as we figure that out, then do we need to talk about meeting fees anymore in the draft? I would just like other people's opinion on this. I think it's okay as is, but it'd certainly be helpful as we're thinking about fees in general. So the next thing, there was actually a bit of a discussion in the chat. This is perhaps out of scope for this meeting, but the feedback from the online hackathon has been good, and that people are like, hey, it's great that we're having it. This is useful. We're getting some good things done. But I think the feedback each time has been, it's certainly not better than, or certainly not, doesn't replace the in-person experience. And a lot of the social interaction, the productivity, the participation, it all suffers. And we've certainly seen that in terms of the number of people presenting, participating, the number of projects we have, how many people actually work on each project. A lot of the projects just have 1 or 2 people now, instead of those nice group projects that had, a dozen or more. So it's clear from the hackathon participants that, we're really missing the in-person events. And then, we have metrics, and also we do hackathon surveys. So, that was another thing. I'm wondering if it should be captured. So I'd love some discussion on these things, as soon as I finish going through them all or on the list. And then the last question would be, at IETF 109, we confirmed that this group was a good place to work on this draft. And I feel like it's in pretty good shape now, to where I'm hoping it can be adopted by the working group as a working group draft. Maybe more of a question for the chairs than just for the working group. But anyways, those are the questions, and I'd love to get some discussion going on them or anything else.
Thanks, Charles. Go ahead, Media.
Yeah, actually, thanks for writing this. I think it's useful to document all these things. Because you said, like, the feedback you get is kind of positive, but you're missing the in-person meetings. So my experience was a little bit that it's somehow a completely different thing, right? And at the in-person meetings, you just walk around, you talk to random people, discuss all kind of things. While now, where the hackathon is like a full week, you can actually meet up kind of every day, discuss different things. You have like completely different opportunities. I would even like to kind of keep both. Unfortunately, usually this week before the IETF meeting, it's where you sit a lot of time in the airplane, so you can't really participate at the hackathon. But maybe that's something to consider, that like when we move back to in person, that you maybe want to add something to that, where you have like a pre-meeting the Monday before or whatever, to like also keep some of the benefits we see right now.
Yeah, that's a good point. That's something we've talked about doing. We've had like pre-hackathon calls, but they've been a little more focused on the, I don't know, the running of the hackathon, I guess, the flow of how the event goes, as opposed to getting work started on your projects. But certainly we've always encouraged people to work on projects leading into the hackathon, and many groups do. And then we have the Code Lounge that we keep throughout the IETF meeting week to kind of promote and give us space for working on hackathon projects. And we've seen that actually get used a fair bit. So yeah, good point. I think the Code Lounge aspect covers the during the meeting and kind of, but before the meeting, it would probably be helpful to have something. So
yeah, what I've seen is that I think a lot of people actually took like some time away to just do some hacking this week before the IETF meeting. Mm-hmm. And that's a positive thing, but then at the same time, if you have to fly somewhere or whatever, that's much harder. So yeah, don't know how to preserve that.
Actually, that's when a lot of us do the best coding, though, because you're completely offline usually. So it's like
I know, like I have no idea how you do this on your small screen in an airplane, squeeze in an airplane, but like I know people do that. So
better eyes, Miria, better eyes. That's all I can say. Niels, go ahead.
Thanks a lot for your Thanks a lot for your work on this, Charles. And I've been participating in the hackathon quite a bit, and doing it online changed the dynamics. When we were having it in person, we would get walk-ins from people who had excellent coding skills. But now we do it online. We have a lot of new first-time participants to the project, and people that now are also interested in participating in the IETF, for which the barrier is lower because there's also the fee waiver. So we're getting in quite a lot of fresh blood, and for them, the hackathon is also a relatively low barrier of entry. So I think that's also a real nice function of the hackathon, which might be a bit more foregrounded in the draft as well, because aside from running code, I think it's also a place where a lot of new people feel a lower barrier of entry in the IETF. To integrate it a bit more, perhaps the IETF plenary could be used to present some of the outcomes of the hackathon. Of course, not all, and not necessarily a winner, but maybe some highlights, maybe some things you found or others found. I know you've given presentations, but maybe getting some people and some highlights might be cool. Furthermore, the track wiki feels a bit fragile. If it didn't, the champions might update it a bit more with like daily updates where they got, with a bit of a schedule, links, and maybe even tickets. But I'll leave that to others. So those were my 2 cents. Thanks a lot for organizing. And
thanks, Niels. And I think like one thing is like, there is usually a summary of the hackathon in the plenary. Is there something specific you're looking for, Niels, in there, or like you think it should be expanded from what it is today, or just trying to ask, like because there is something there.
I thought it would be nice if maybe some of the projects would have some space, so that also people who are more relatively new have a bit more time in the sun, and to integrate them a bit further in the community and get them a bit more visibility of the super cool and interesting work. And generally, people also love to see new work, right? So that's fun, I think.
Cool, thank you.
Yeah, so just a couple of things we do. So we rely first on the closing of the hackathon. So that's when the presentations actually happen, and that does get recorded. So in this case, that was Friday last week. But then, I've noticed in several working group meetings that I've gone to or been in that at the hackathons, what the projects that the teams worked on related to the working group have been presented. In the NetConf, that was the case, and the NMRG meeting, that was the case, and several others. So we've opted more for presenting them in the working group sessions in more detail, just because in the plenary we did that a couple times, and that was really important when we were just starting to get the word out about the hackathon, but it did take up a good chunk of time, and unless you go in a certain depth, it's hard to relate to a broad audience how important the work was. The working group gets it, but unless you spend some time, it's hard unless you're a really good presenter to figure out what's going to resonate with people. So, but we could look at that again. The other thing is the Hack Demo Happy Hour. We only do that at in-person events, but that's the Monday after the hackathon. It's kind of a social thing where anyone who wants to present their project can be there sort of at a demo table and have those more in-depth interactive discussions with people who wander by. So we don't have anything like that for online only meetings, but maybe we could look to do something to replace that.
Okay, thanks, Charles. And we are out of time. And so Charles, you said, right, it's something that's called by a charter. So I will do adoption call on the list next week after the IETF week. Let's get something kicked off. And unless you tell me there's some pending changes, we'll do it on the current version of the draft. So thank you all for coming, and please send any comments that you want to the list that you committed to, so we can get the draft moving forward. Thank you.